Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the ScholarAI Founders Pod. Check us out on all your local podcast locations and find us on our YouTube channel. Be sure to leave a comment in the sections below, and we'll get to them in upcoming episodes. So, Joshi, thanks for calling in, joining us from a distant location there. Why don't you kind of provide the audience some context as to some of the ways that you're thinking about AI as it pertains to our startup, the broader market, and this idea of what might be coming in the form of an AI winter?
We had our company offsite a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things we talked about is the coming AI winter and what we need to do to prepare for that, how we prepare in terms of our thinking, our roadmap, and how the overall AI funding cycle in AI will go through its natural trajectories, which has had its peaks and will inevitably have its valleys, and that the preparation that we put in needs to kind of factor in that valley coming. I think this is a cycle that we could see clearly in crypto. As an example, there was a period of very heavy investment in crypto, and then a trough of disillusionment to reference the Gartner hype cycle, and then kind of a valley of funding and a crypto winter. I think a similar thing in terms of the funding cycle specifically can happen and will happen in AI. Whether that's 6 months from now, 12 months from now, there will be a winter for AI companies, which will lead to many AI companies going belly up. We're probably seeing the beginnings of that already. And that's overlaid onto a tighter venture window than maybe many perceive from the outside. If you only see the headline numbers for the biggest AI companies, you don't perceive the tightness in venture that everybody below that line perceives. And that's because venture financing is down, I believe, 60% over the last couple of years, as the risk-free rate is just so much higher with treasuries. And the stock market offers lots of high growth alternatives to venture investing.
And Lakshay, any reaction to that?
Yeah, of the three of us, I'm probably the newest to the whole venture thing. I think it's been pretty interesting, I guess, almost being like an active student of how this all works and like the macroeconomic influences and the way you kind of predict and plan around stuff. It oftentimes has felt in my perception that like the way to raise capital and like survive like what is like reduced funding in general is like build gigantic product that invokes a lot of FOMO very, very suddenly, and that just builds enough momentum that you can survive into the next round, right? I can't assume that's generally true in a space where normally I assume it will be more like a lot more due diligence, a lot of like very, very slower cycles that are much more methodical. But yeah, I don't know. I think I'll have significant stuff to add beyond just like as a witness of it for the first time. It's an interesting time to be building a company. So yeah, that's all I'd say.
Yeah, it is interesting. You're right. Just sharing some context for not my own perspective, but historical perspective is a lot of the best and biggest companies were built in times of quote unquote economic downturn, whether that is global macroeconomic forces or simply suppression in the venture market. And at least the thinking towards that is you have to have something that works when fundraising is hard, right? Because you have to have these proof points to either acquire funds via a raising effort, or you actually have to become profitable very soon, or else the business kind of dies, and therefore it kind of acts as an artificial or maybe even a natural forcing function to build a more sustainable business. So whether that's good or bad, I think we could debate, but I do think it's interesting. But I do want to call specific attention to a real life example of how this might be playing out, and that's specifically with Humane. So we've seen Humane kind of release their AI, and it was met with mixed reviews at best, negative reviews, kind of maybe more accurate. And we have since seen stories that they are seeking a sell, an acquisition, or an exit of some kind. And so the question I would ask Shashi first and then Lakshay is, do you think that Humane is seeing it similarly and that they're seeing peak AI valuations right now? And so they're thinking we should sell now before AI valuations dip and then we're caught in in that turbulence? Or do you think they have seen kind of the writing on the wall, meaning like this business is not really going in the direction we would like it to be going. And we think regardless of what happens with the overall valuation of AI companies, we're headed in the wrong direction. So
the Humane story is a fascinating one in that they were they did exactly what Lakshay described earlier. They created FOMO. They caught lots of attention. The initial Google search I did, it says they raised $241 million. So they've raised a lot of money, and for at a time when there was a time in which they were perceived as potentially an Apple competitor, a serious Apple competitor down the road. So their potential sale, if true, is a fascinating case study in the cyclical and highly volatile nature of venture investing at the top end, at the very large, ambitious competitor to an incumbent style investing. Supposedly, they are seeking 750 to 1 billion in exit, though I don't know who gives them that. I don't think Apple does that now, and I don't know I can't think of any company that would be a reasonable acquirer of that IP. Very expensive shot. They took a shot on goal. It looks like they've missed, and what to do with it after the fact is a dangerous territory. Conversely, what we described earlier in terms of preparation for AI winter, what does that look like? It primarily looks like being responsible with capital. So knowing whatever you're spending now, you can spend in perpetuity until you get to where you need to be. We're fortunate to be in that position. Plus, we're fortunate that ScholarAI has a lot of revenue and revenue growth as well. But a lot of companies either aren't that tight with their spending or don't have as much near-term revenue potential to sustain an AI winter. What do you do if you're the leader of a company? If you are able to withstand and survive those winter conditions, then it's a phenomenal time to go buy other companies. So being acquisitive, that's a wonderful time to go do that where the market values are down and you can go scoop up IP and talent. The other thing you want to do aggressively in that situation is hire the very best people who are perhaps in situations where the company needs to exit, close down, and you can find those talented people. So that's part of the thinking of how we would prepare.
Alex, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think you were originally prompted asking about like Humane is it a victim of the AI winter? I think like one thing that's interesting, I don't know how hardware cycles typically work, but especially when you're building like consumer software, like the typical like message is like build really fast, talk to your customers a lot, always like kind of get reactions all the time. And from what I understand, they're building in like stealth for something like 6 years. I think a big section of what they missed on was from what I understand, they were working on like their own internal like LLM model. I don't know if it was formally an LLM, but some sort of AI model that was supporting their voice agents, whatever. I think what kind of happened to them is that there was a lot of overinvestment in that thing as something patentable and something that was IP. But then ChatGPT came out like 2 years or like 1.5 years before they're intending on releasing, that kind of blew that out of the water. Great. I mean, you're seeing all the dialogue like, hey, start building things that are aligned with model improvements. Don't bet on doing better than the models. And they started doing that. But I'm sure like in regards to like the way their capital is being spent between hardware, between software, between like all the little tiny things that go into designing such a small form factor, there was a big timing miss there. And just like the software that they were building that was really unique was something that ChatGPT just kind of destroyed instantaneously. I think when I look at Humane, like I don't necessarily treat them as an AI company. Obviously, I just mentioned that they're building an AI tool, and that's obviously part of it. But at least at the level of product, like I don't know if I would label them an AI company themselves. I think the success that they were seeking and the like consequent like failure as a product was not one related to being an AI startup. It was just kind of being a bad consumer product. It wasn't that they didn't spend a lot of time like testing and like guiding this thing to what would have been a very successful product. And that's why you saw like when reviews came out, they're all brutal. That would have been feedback that I would expect a company like them that was in stealth for 6 years to have gotten like 3 years ago. Like it just needed more time in the oven, or they should have done like more customer testing way earlier.
It feels, there's a couple of threads that I'd like to pull on there. I do think number one, it is very possible that they were over investing in retrospect in AI systems that they were trying to build themselves that then were kind of replaced in essence by the larger models, right? OpenAI or otherwise. I do think that, may have been a strategic, choice at the time that made a lot of sense that kind of, again, in hindsight, just turned out to be the wrong bet. So we can kind of get, yeah, exactly. I think that in large part that happens, right? Forces outside of your control kind of influence decisions that, had you had that information, you would have made otherwise. I think that's perfectly reasonable. Secondarily to that, where I do think they've kind of fundamentally made a misstep is in number one, the idea of replacing a smartphone, probably maybe impossible. And then even if it isn't impossible, it's probably a longer term play. And I where I would have liked to see someone with Humane's AI ambition start is as a smartphone app en route to the hardware standalone device. To me, that makes more sense as far as the go-to-market strategy is concerned, because they could have accomplished a lot of the things that you're saying, Lakshay, in getting the product feedback from the software side, right? The hardware is elegant. It's really well made, but it's not yet clear to me if the hardware is necessary in any component to actually perform the quote unquote actions that Humane wanted to perform, right? Yes, obviously you couldn't have the always on camera, but again, to me, that feels a little bit like something they could have released secondarily once they already vetted how good and, how well they could acquire and retain customers from purely the software side. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that simply just kind of like isolates their market. They didn't want to be an app company. I get it. They're a hardware specialist, so they wanted to go the hardware route. Hardware companies are notoriously difficult. So in some ways, swing big, win big, lose big. They went that cycle. I think that's, again, maybe that was part of the strategic design of the overall company. I'm eyes wide open to that. But I do think that, building with the idea of capital efficiency in mind, going straight to the hardware play without first validating your core value proposition, which is software based, to me feels like it was out of sequence. Josh, it seems like you want to react to that.
It would have been interesting to see. I agree with you that they could have started with an app. I would have, if you got to start it over now today, I would be really interested in the company in Humane releasing an SDK or some kind of interface point where anybody could create a piece of hardware that would sort of natively plug into the brain of the pin. So if I wanted to stick like 4 cameras all over me in different places, or if I wanted like 6 mics or whatever my use case might be, like to be able to have like an extensible brain that could plug in as many different sensors as you wanted in whatever configuration you want. And if the brain could just kind of put all that together and say, okay, now I get what you're trying to do. Let's go to work. That would have been really interesting in addition to the app. Yeah.
I will say, just like timing wise, I feel like it is very unfortunate for like them as a company that their like launch happened like a month before GPT 4.0. It does feel like there was a very, very big opportunity to like be a wearable on what is the proposed API of GPT 4.0. Like if you assume that like vocal latency is way lower, like image live stream, like text input output loop is like very, very tight. I feel like that suddenly just makes for a lot more interesting of a product proposition than was currently like hold chest, talk to it for a second, wait for it to process for 8, and it talks to you back in the time that you could have looked for something, right? It is unlucky in that way a little bit. But I don't know. You live and learn, I guess.
Yeah, I do think it's worth noting that we're speculating from the outside, right? I mean, I'm sure the people that are in this company are very smart. Like this is obviously this is hindsight's 2020, as they say. So I do think there are some things that, could have been done differently. But again, they probably didn't know GPT-4 Omni was coming, right? And even to me, though, pulling on that thread slightly further is even if they had released after the Omni release, it still is unclear to me why you need dedicated hardware beyond the smartphone to validate the hypotheses that Humane is at least publicly presenting, right? If they really wanted to move towards a smartphone-less future, that feels like a difficult value proposition for me to get behind. If they always believe there's going to be a place for the smartphone plus their device, it does feel like you could prove a lot of those concepts via software only en route to, your hardware play. But again, maybe just a consequence of poor timing on their part. So, I want to take that opportunity to kind of segue into a different conversation, which we have speculated about internally and in fact have kind of turned development efforts towards. And this is the idea that was kind of recently released and popularized by A16Z, which is this idea of phase one of AI as we've seen it to date has really been this input to output model in which you kind of put generic prompts into a chat GPT or a chat-like interface, and then that can lead to a diversity of answers, right? You can ask it to write an email. You can ask it to write a paper. You can ask it to summarize articles. You can ask it to create posts for X, formerly Twitter. You can do this kind of diversity of tasks with this singular interface. The proposition of A16Z, and I think correctly reflects the way that we are thinking about this as well, is layer two or system two or second phase two is going to be the idea of synthesis. So taking in disparate information from various places, synthesizing those things, and leading to a higher quality but narrower kind of work product. So rather than being this kind of one size fits all do anything chatbot, it is a do one thing, but do one thing to the level approaching human competence. And so I just want to kind of set that stage. And then, Lakshya, let's start with you. Why don't you react kind of to the overall ideas, how you kind of see that playing out, how that might have shaped recent dev efforts at ScholarAI, or kind of take it any direction you'd like.
Yeah, I think so. I guess like when I look at the way of trends, like I think that for the last year, like, and I mentioned this before, like what we started as is basically a RAG company before RAG really had like a popularized name. I think at the time, I think one thing that's kind of been interesting to witness is the birth of these incumbent like LLM provider companies into consumer companies. I think one thing that's come up with that is that you are increasingly seeing that these companies that offer Gemini, that offer ChatGPT, that offer like the most advanced models are also building into the functionality space of here is the general web page you land on to do anything AI related, right? That space is getting very, very busy. And I think not just at the level of competition, but just at the level of like users are coming to expect more beyond just how you differentiate, what do you do differently that makes your product worthwhile. It's becoming increasingly so that like what you do correctly is the matter of fact is like 70 to like 60% of people who use computers for their work are not super aware of what ChatGPT is or how to make good use of it. What you do instead is now you start selling to those people and say, let us make your processes more efficient than they already are. And doing so, like you have something that's not going to be competing with Gemini. You have something that's not competing with ChatGPT. You have something that has a very specific user that you get to know and understand. Whereas earlier it was, here is a problem with the model. Here is a problem with the LLM product. Let me solve that. And then the people who use those products will come to me, right? It's a little bit of a different paradigm in that just like things move fast, people move a little bit slower. You pick the one that helps the slower people, I guess.
The first wave of AI. So just to return to the economics, and we can reference here NVIDIA, which has just reported another quarter of great earnings. So far, what's driving real economics? It's chips, NVIDIA being the primary beneficiary there. It's data centers. It's server, the physical server hardware and electrical physical infrastructure that goes into data center production. It's all of that that's driving real economics. And what's emerging is the LLM space. GPT-4o took an interesting step forward in particularly in efficiency and agility, the multimodal agility. Not particularly in inference, as we kind of expected the next step of OpenAI releases to lead to, but also really helpful. And so what are we seeing? We're seeing consolidation at the bottom. We're seeing a lot of activity, a frenzy of activity at the app level and at the dev tool level. And everyone who's building an end user app now is using, in a way, bespoke materials and methods, to use a scientific term. There isn't enough consolidation to have kind of a reliable, like, what materials and methods do I expect you to use as an app developer if you're building this kind of app? And once we pass through another let's say, a year of development in this industry, there will be more consolidation, more baseline expectation of, if you're building a RAG application, you're probably using this kind of underlying architecture and infrastructure to deliver it. For the most part, this is the established best practice and the way to do this. And if you're not, then I can have a baseline understanding of, okay, you're probably not doing it the quote unquote right way or reliable way or consensus way that everyone has sort of decided together, this is the way we build this kind of application. So that's the phase we're in, where there's this kind of, everybody's developing bespoke materials and methods to develop end user apps. And that will evolve toward more consolidated, best practice driven approaches over the next year or so, is my expectation. And so that's a long-winded way of answering your original question, Damon. But I think that's kind of where we're all heading, is everyone's moving from bespoke to standardized.
As we start to think about the use cases for AI products, and we start to bucket those use cases into categories of information products. So let's call those emails, social media content, and some sort of other, that some of those use cases feel to me more general purpose, where these kind of horizontal, ChatGPT and ChatGPT-like systems can fulfill those at a pretty, high quality level relative to like the effort that's put in by humans. The other more complex work product, in which the formation of those products is actually the collection of subtasks. So if you think about writing a scientific paper, right, there are lots of individual subtasks that go into that much larger information product. I do think that is when the system of, like you're illustrating, Shashi, this kind of multi-layer tech stack that goes beyond just the commodity layer of hardware and large language model, but now includes specialized tooling in the dev tool layer and also specialized functionality in the app layer, become incredibly important, right? Because by being bespoke in some of those processes, as we move towards that standardization that you're outlining, enables that increased functionality to be able to break apart those more kind of like quote unquote complex work streams, repackage them in a way that puts AI into the loop, leading to, what is approaching, hopefully, human level productivity in those things. And so you get, I think that we're a ways away from completely replacing human beings in those work product loops. But I do think that as AI advances and more people get to spend more and more cycles building with increased depth in some of these use cases, we will begin to see kind of emergent capabilities for these systems when they are well packaged together. And I do think that's probably that well packaging, if you will, is what's going to spark that quote unquote standardization of these toolings, right? We're going to see people, hopefully we'll be one of them, develop kind of the essential, let's call it connective tissue between a large language model and the ultimate end user, both at the dev tool and app layer, such that what's coming out of those applications are kind of truly useful. So that's a lot. I'll pause there for any reaction to that.
How do you see building an API? And I say this to kind of tee up our logic, our thinking. How do you guys see building an API in the current environment, and why build an API? Why offer an API to your customers and to developers?
Yeah, I think so. If folks haven't already seen the email, maybe from this week or last week, depending on when this goes live, we've launched an API. So basically everything that we were supporting in the ChatGPT interface, like as our plugin and our GPT, is now available for anyone to use, right? If you're on the free tier or whatever, you just use the same monetization system we have. And you can use the API kind of as you please, as if it were your own. I think the general logic to me is, one, the audience we have of scientists, inventors, like engineers, like very, very naturally, like I think the pace of innovation in this industry and with AI tools is so high that if anything, it makes a lot of logical sense that like people should be able to play with it and customize it and tune it into something that is their own. I think especially as we look at directions down which we're going, places to prioritize, I think this is kind of like a pleasant way that a user can take the stuff that we've built, the skeletons we're making, the baseline like scaffolding that we've been building and will continue to work on, and say, okay, this works great for my scientific papers. I have this specific workflow. I want to make my workflow even if ScholarAI might be doing something else, right? You can focus on marine biology if you have different APIs that you use for, and you can connect ScholarAI to that. If you use Zapier and you want to have like a very deep workflow with Google Sheets or Google Drive, you could also do that, right? I think it's just very fundamentally, the goal here is liberating users to take what is a very, very exciting time to be building and help people build, right? And all that to say, I think that this release is an alpha, so we still have a lot to do. I think one thing that I keep reiterating to the team, I want to make sure that we communicate externally, is that we've been building for LLMs as our audience, which is a very, very different paradigm in that like we have to prompt a lot, we have to manage content windows a lot. So if you're trying to use this as like a very, very vanilla API, there's probably going to be a lot of stuff that you're working with us with. But we have a Discord, so join it. If you have questions or confusion, we'll take feedback and keep iterating.
I think that's well said. I'm going to try to use a poor analogy here, I think, to illustrate the way that I see the tech stack kind of emerging. I think that if we look at this like a tree, at the very base of the tree, you have the hardware layer, right? Some ways up from there, you do have the large language model layer, or kind of whatever the evolution of that becomes, but increasingly ever more powerful, ever more generalizable intelligence, kind of in air quotes there. Just beyond that, you do have some relative connective tissue that leads you to end user apps, either in the business to business use case or in the direct to consumer use case. In much the same way that education is designed to build human intelligence, I view that tech stack as building machine intelligence. And at the end of the human educational intelligence path, you get this incredible divergence of specialties, right? Even if you just took graduate school in the sciences, right? You get people headed down marine biology, you get people down engineering, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, et cetera, et cetera. And what I see this API priming for is that divergence, right? It is kind of a central node that then allows these people who are tinkerers by nature, whether they want to build apps for themselves or for themselves and other people, or solely for other people. It allows them to specialize the tooling in a way that they are uniquely situated to specialize, in the same way that a marine biologist would look at a problem in marine biology much differently than someone in ecology might, or someone in economics might, those kind of things. And so I think all that to say, I believe the API can be a powerful platform for those that want to shape AI in a way that we simply couldn't understand because of our perspective, right? We know what we can build, and we believe we're very talented at building those things. We would like to empower other people who are talented in other disciplines, other specialties, to go and build the apps that they need to use for themselves, or that they would like to design for other people. And so I think that the API is the first step in getting there. I think it's a powerful first step, but as Lakshay illustrated, lots of improvements to be made, lots of user, interviews and discovery efforts to be done there. But with all that said, if you are as excited about building in the space of AI as we are, and you would like to see if ScholarAI can help you achieve your goals, whether they be goals for yourself or for other people, we'd love to talk. So as like I said, join our Discord, hit us up on social media, find us where you're listening to this podcast, and we would be eager to kind of engage with you and see how we can help you build with the ScholarAI API.
Everybody in the AI industry, from big companies to startups, is working on one question, and that is, how do we make AI useful for work? That's a central driver for Microsoft's latest announcement with their Copilot, the central driver for Google's I/O announcements, and the direction that Sam Altman and Brad Lightcap have talked about, OpenAI going as well. That question of how do we make AI useful for work is an exponential graph. And humans are really bad at intuiting what an exponential graph looks like. The amount of effort it will take to make it useful will be an exponentially higher amount of work than it took to get to the point of usefulness we're at today. That means a lot more specific training, whether that's for RAG or fine tuning or reinforcement learning. It means a lot more data. It means a lot more process mapping and diagramming. And the power of an API is that we can take the part that we've built and let anyone fork off of it for their specific use case and get really focused and narrow to make AI useful for work for them. Because being useful for one field for a chemist will be very different from having AI be useful for a microbiologist or someone else. So that kind of getting AI all the way to the point of usefulness will require lots of these components to be able to be plugged and played with each other. And that's hopefully what the AI can do. Our ScholarAI API can do for builders.
One thing that I think is really interesting to see is we're seeing the emergence of agentic workflows, and that's been a thing for like at least a couple months now, but it's never really entered like common vernacular. And one of the most obvious places that like people have been applying LMs and agents to has been research, right? We're seeing the use of agents for like, help me understand this like research topic. And to do that, instead of just simple RAG, what I want you to do is like have 3 different agents that are all interacting in a specific way, that are designed to criticize and come up with counter arguments and then output a work product that you can then use, for example, to understand whatever topic you care about, right? I think I'm really interested to see like in the space of agents, there's so much that you could do. I could foresee that our tool is used for very vanilla, just simple, like, hey, in the same way our Copilot does, just like tell me about papers, right? We could also see something like, help me come up with a counter argument agent that looks at the paper I'm writing, finds papers that contradict it, right? Build an agent that does that, and then can help me write better papers, right? There's just a lot of potential kind of in there to explore when you assume that you have the toolbox rather than the finished car.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to leave with. The analogy that I think can loosely be used here is the idea of closed source versus open source, right? In some ways, the release of the API is our first attempt to, open source, if you will, the tooling that we've built on top of these large language models that ultimately make them useful for scientists and inventors. And so again, I would just encourage anybody who wants to build in this space to reach out to any of us, join our Discord, put your comments in the sections below, find us anywhere you can typically find us, and please test out the API, and we would love to hear feedback. We know it's not perfect. Again, as Lakshay said, it's an alpha. We try to put it out there so we can see how people are actually getting used for it, and so we can improve on the ways that most benefit you all. So as always, thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next week. Be sure to check us out on all the podcast platforms and on our YouTube channel. Thanks.